The ride to the station was painfully awkward. Officer, overzealous, occasionally glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his face devoid of emotion. If he had any inkling of the firestorm he was about to unleash, he didn't show it. Meanwhile, my mind raced. I wasn't angry just for myself. This was bigger than me. It was about what his actions represented. A broken system that allowed unchecked authority to trample over rights without consequence. The station was a stark contrast to the chaos on the street. Sterile fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of quiet conversations echoed across the walls. As soon as we walked in, heads turned. It didn't take long for whispers to ripple through the room. Wait, isn't that Samuel Ross? The FBI director? Does he know what he's doing? Officer Overzealous ignored the murmurs, dragging me toward the booking desk like I was a trophy catch. He gestured for me to sit on a hard metal chair while he started filling out paperwork. As he scribbled away, I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. The atmosphere shifted. Colleagues who had initially given curious glances were now exchanging uneasy looks. A few officers stepped aside to whisper amongst themselves. Fragments of their conversations drifted toward me. Doesn't make sense? This is going to blow up? Has to be a mistake? And then, the phone rang. The desk sergeant, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, picked up the receiver. As soon as the caller spoke, his expression changed. His jaw tightened, and beads of sweat formed on his brow. His posture straightened, almost instinctively. Whatever was being said on the other end wasn't good news for him, or for Officer Overzealous. When the call ended, the sergeant stood abruptly, nearly knocking his chair over in the process. He marched straight to Officer Overzealous, who was still reveling in his so-called triumph. The sergeant's voice was low, but sharp enough to slice through the tension in the room. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed. "Do you realize what you've done? That's the director of the FBI." The color drained from Overzealous' face. He stammered. He was acting suspicious. "I was just doing my job." "Your job?" The sergeant's voice rose, catching the attention of everyone in the room. "Your job is to enforce the law, not embarrass this entire department. Uncuff him. Now." Overzealous fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. The moment my wrists were free, I stood up and adjusted my suit. My gaze met his, and for the first time, his confidence faltered completely. "Apologies, sir," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "It was a misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding?" My voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "Is that what you're going with?" The room fell silent. No one dared to speak, their discomfort palpable. Overzealous turned crimson, his gaze fixed on the floor. The sergeant, clearly desperate to salvage the situation, stepped forward. "Director Ross, please accept our sincerest apologies. This was an unfortunate mistake." "Oh, it was more than unfortunate," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "But don't worry, I'll make sure it's corrected." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the station. As I stepped outside, the crowd that had gathered earlier was still lingering. Reporters had arrived, their cameras trained on the station's entrance. Flashing lights and shouted questions filled the air as I made my way to my car. Back at my office, I immediately called an emergency meeting. My team gathered quickly, sensing the urgency in my voice. Once everyone was seated, I stood at the head of the table, still in my now slightly rumpled suit. "This isn't just about what happened to me," I began, my voice steady but firm. "This is about accountability. This officer didn't just overstep, he abused his power. And I guarantee he's not the only one." My chief of staff, Linda Warren, nodded. "What's the plan?" "We're digging," I said, looking around the room. "Every complaint, every incident, every questionable action this officer has ever taken. I want it all. And not just him, his supervisors, his colleagues, the entire precinct. If there's rot, we're going to expose it." Within hours, the investigation was in full swing. My team worked tirelessly, combing through records, interviewing witnesses, and compiling evidence. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Officer Overzealous, whose real name we now knew as Darren Brooks, had a history. There were complaints of unlawful arrests, excessive force, and fabricated charges, many of which had been quietly swept under the rug. His supervisor, the same sergeant who had reprimanded him at the station, was complicit. Records showed he had dismissed multiple complaints and intimidated witnesses into silence. But that wasn't all. Financial records revealed connections to shady deals. Anonymous whistleblowers came forward with stories of systemic abuse, recounting incidents where officers had targeted minorities and activists. It wasn't just one bad cop, it was an institutional problem. As we compiled our findings, the media caught wind of the story. Headlines splashed across major outlets. FBI director wrongfully arrested, abuse of power exposed, corruption in local police precinct uncovered. Samuel Ross speaks out, a call for accountability. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #accountability_now, #justice_for_all, and #reform the system trended nationwide. Videos of my arrest circulated endlessly, accompanied by captions like, "If this can happen to the FBI director, what chance do the rest of us have?" The public outrage was immediate and fierce. Protests erupted across the country, with demonstrators demanding police reform. Signs reading "No justice, no peace, and equal rights, equal laws, filled the streets. People shared their own stories of mistreatment, flooding social media with testimonials that painted a grim picture of systemic issues within law enforcement. The Justice Department, under immense pressure, announced a federal investigation into the precinct. Brooks and his supervisor were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. But for many, that wasn't enough. "I want real change," I told my team during a late-night meeting. "Not just a slap on the wrist. Policies need to be rewritten. Training needs to address bias and abuse of power. This can't happen again." Weeks passed, but the momentum didn't wane. The protests continued. The media coverage intensified, and the investigation deepened. Whistleblowers provided damning evidence, from secret watch lists targeting minorities to internal emails revealing a culture of impunity. When the investigation concluded, the findings were explosive. Brooks was found guilty of multiple counts of misconduct, including unlawful arrests and falsifying reports. His supervisor faced charges for obstruction of justice and was stripped of his rank. The entire precinct underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership, revised policies, and mandatory training programs implemented. As for me, the experience was a harsh reminder of the work that still needed to be done. I had spent my career fighting for justice, only to find myself on the receiving end of its absence. But this wasn't just about me. It was about exposing the cracks in the system and doing something to fix them. Looking back, I see this as more than just a personal victory. It was proof that accountability isn't just a word, it's a movement. Change doesn't happen overnight, but this was a start. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even the smallest ripple can create a wave. This extended narrative builds on the original by adding new layers of development, from the deeper investigation into systemic corruption to the public and political fallout. Let me know if there's a specific part you'd like to expand further.